He looked me straight in the eye and said, "I can't finish this case because I'm married to her too." That sentence should not have been possible. A private investigator doesn't say things like that. But in that moment, I realized my marriage wasn't just broken, it was shared. And I was never the only husband. I was 35, she was 33. On the surface, we still looked like any other married couple in our quiet suburban neighborhood. Same house, same routines, same cars in the driveway. But the silence between us had grown heavier with every passing week. She started coming home at 1940 instead of 1815, then 2025, then later. Never enough to accuse her of anything specific, just enough to notice. Her explanations became shorter until they disappeared completely. She would walk through the door, hang her coat, and move past me toward the kitchen without a word. I kept waiting for the usual small talk that never arrived. I watched her from the couch at 22:10 one night as she stood by the window, phone in hand, thumb moving slowly across the screen. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just stared at whatever was there with the kind of focus that used to belong only to me. The next morning I found a single receipt in the pocket of her coat while she was in the shower. A coffee shop I had never heard of, 40 minutes outside the city. 2 lots. Paid in cash at $17.55. She had told me she worked late that day. I folded the receipt and put it back exactly where I found it. That evening she arrived at 21:05. Her hair looked freshly brushed. Her perfume, the one she rarely wore anymore, lingered stronger than usual. She kicked off her heels and went straight upstairs without looking at me. I stayed downstairs until 23:40, listening to the sound of the shower running longer than necessary. Love doesn't go quiet like that without a reason. I told myself it was work stress for 3 straight weeks. Then 4. Then I stopped telling myself anything at all. On a Tuesday morning, after she left for the office at 7:50, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee untouched. I opened my laptop and searched for private investigators within a 50-mile radius. I spent 40 minutes reading reviews before I picked up the phone. The man I hired had a calm voice and asked very few questions. I gave him her license plate, her usual routes, and the name of her workplace. He said he would start the following day. I didn't feel relief when I hung up. I felt something colder. Like stepping off solid ground and realizing the drop beneath me was deeper than I had imagined. 3 days later, the first report arrived by encrypted email at 8:15. She had not been at the office until 19 o'clock on Monday. She had left at 16:40, driven to a small hotel on the edge of town, and stayed inside for 2 hours and 17 minutes. The investigator had taken photos from across the street. In one of them, she was walking out of the side entrance adjusting the strap of her dress. There was no second car in any of the images. I stared at the timestamp on the photo for a long time, 18:12. Then I closed the laptop and sat in complete silence until the numbers on the kitchen clock read 9:03. She still had not explained anything, and now I understood she wasn't going to. The worst part wasn't what the photos showed. It was what they didn't show. The investigator met me in a small diner at 7:55 on a Thursday. He was older than I expected, mid-50s, with steady hands and eyes that had seen too many similar stories. He listened without interrupting while I slid the folder with her recent movements across the table. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't offer judgment. He simply nodded once and said he would begin digging deeper. Within 4 days, the first updates arrived by secure email at 8:12 each morning. At first, the reports showed ordinary patterns. She left the house at 7:48, arrived at the office by 8:35, stayed until 18:20 most evenings. Nothing stood out. Nothing except the growing gaps in her explanations at home. Then the financial details appeared. 3 cash withdrawals in 1 week. $200 on Monday at 16:40. Another $300 on Wednesday at 19:15 from an ATM near the highway. 500 more on Friday morning at 6:55, before she even left for work. Always cash. Always at times that didn't match her official schedule. I checked our joint account statements twice, then a third time, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves. The hotel bookings came next. 2 separate reservations appeared on the same night, 2 weeks apart. One at a Marriott 40 miles north of the city on the 12th. Another at a boutique hotel downtown on the 26th. Both nights she had told me she was attending late client dinners. Both nights, the investigator confirmed she had checked in alone. But the bookings overlapped in a way that made no sense. Same pattern, different locations. She stayed exactly 2 hours and 40 minutes each time before leaving again. I sat at the kitchen table at 23:40 reading the latest report. The screen light reflected off the dark window behind me. Outside, her car sat in the driveway exactly where she had parked it at 21:10. Clean. Ordinary. Nothing on the passenger seat. Nothing in the back. The investigator's final line in that report lingered longer than the rest. The pattern did not yet point to a second man in the usual sense. No repeated male companion. No obvious romantic meetings captured on camera. Yet the word he used stayed with me through the night. Yet, I closed the laptop at 07 and walked upstairs. She was already asleep, breathing slow and even under the blanket. I stood in the doorway for a long minute watching the rise and fall of her chest. The same woman who once told me everything now moved through our house like a careful shadow. The withdrawals continued. The hotel stays continued. But something else was moving beneath them. Something the reports had not yet named. Because if it wasn't the obvious thing, then what exactly was she doing with those hours, that cash, and those quiet departures? I didn't ask the investigator again. I wasn't sure I wanted the next answer to arrive any faster than it already was. The next week moved faster than I could track. The investigator sent a new file at 9:17 on Monday morning. This time, it wasn't simple hotel stays or cash withdrawals. It was a timeline overlay. 2 separate patterns running on the exact same dates. One version of her moved through our city in her usual gray sedan. The other appeared in places that made no sense. Same hours. Overlapping minutes. She couldn't have been in both locations at once. Yet the records insisted she was. I stared at the map for 40 minutes, zooming in and out, trying to find the gap where reality had broken. Wednesday brought the footage. He met me in the back corner of the same diner at 8:40. No greeting. He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. 4 clips played in silence. In the first, she checked into a hotel in the neighboring city using the name Emma Voss, signing with a quick, unfamiliar flourish. In the second, taken the same afternoon 60 miles away, she used Sarah Klein at a different front desk, handwriting tighter and more angular. A third clip showed her as Rebecca Lang walking out of an office building downtown at 17:55, posture straighter than I had ever seen at home. Different names, different signatures, different walks. I watched her become someone else 4 times in under 6 minutes of footage. The financial layer arrived the next day. Smaller transfers, never more than a few thousand at a time, routed through accounts that didn't carry her name. Structured. Clean. The kind of movement that suggested practice rather than panic. Someone was feeding these accounts with precision, keeping each one just active enough to stay invisible. I sat in my car at 23:40 that night, parked 2 blocks from our house, rereading the transaction list on my phone. Her car sat in the driveway under the streetlight, exactly where it belonged. The lights in our bedroom were already off. Then the update stopped. No email at 8:15 on Friday. No message on Saturday. Nothing on Sunday. I checked my phone every 30 minutes, refreshing the secure portal until the screen began to feel hot against my palm. 2 full days of silence. He finally called at 19:20 on Monday evening. His voice sounded different, narrower, as if the air had been pressed out of it. He said only that we needed to meet in person the following morning. No details. No explanation for the gap. Just a time and a new location farther out of town. I arrived at the empty parking lot behind an abandoned strip mall at 8:05. He was already there, standing beside his car with his hands in his coat pockets. He looked like he hadn't slept. When I walked up, he didn't open any files. He didn't show new footage. He simply stood there for a long moment, studying my face as if deciding how much to give me. This was no longer about late nights or strange hotel stays. Whatever she was doing had structure. It had layers. It had been built carefully over time, and it was still moving even while she slept beside me at night. He hadn't said the word yet, but I could feel it forming in the space between us. The question wasn't whether she was living a second life. It was how many she was living at once, and why none of them seemed to need me anymore. We met at 8:25 in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. The investigator didn't sit right away. He stood by the table for several seconds, coat still on, eyes scanning my face as if measuring how much I could take. Then he lowered himself into the chair opposite me. He slid a single folded document across the wooden surface without a word. It was a marriage certificate. Her name. His name. Same woman. Issued 3 years earlier in a city I had never visited. The signature at the bottom matched the sharp, angular version I had seen in the hotel footage. Not the softer one she used on our own documents at home. I stared at the paper for a long time. Then I laughed once. A short, dry sound that died quickly in the empty cafe. I pushed the document back toward him. He didn't take it. He simply watched me, hands resting flat on the table. A second envelope followed. Thinner. Inside were 2 more certificates and a set of timestamps. One showed her boarding a flight under one name, while another record placed her in our city under her real name on the exact same afternoon. Overlapping movements. Impossible logistics. He let the silence stretch until 8:47. Then he spoke again, voice lower. He told me he was legally married to her, not in the way I had assumed. Not as a mistress, as a wife on paper, in another jurisdiction. He had discovered it only 48 hours earlier while trying to trace the offshore accounts. The deeper he dug, the more the layers refused to separate cleanly. He leaned forward slightly. There was a third layer, he said. Something larger than either of us. He used the word victims. Not suspects. Victims. I sat completely still, the untouched coffee growing cold between us. The cafe clock ticked past 9 o'clock. Outside, cars passed on the wet road, normal people heading to normal days. He didn't offer to continue the investigation. He didn't ask for more money. He simply closed the folder and looked at me with the same careful distance he had shown on the first day. Whatever she had built wasn't random infidelity or even clever deception. It was engineered, precise. Multiple lives running in parallel, each one maintained with clean signatures and timed movements. And now the man I had hired to expose her secret had become part of the architecture. I left the cafe at 9:35. The marriage certificate stayed on the table between us. Neither of us reached for it again. The question that followed me home wasn't who she was sleeping with anymore. It was how many versions of her existed, and which one had been sleeping in my bed for the last 7 years. We met again at 6:50 in the same empty parking lot. The investigator brought 2 thick folders and a laptop. We spread everything across the hood of his car under the weak morning light and began comparing. Dates, photos, timestamps, flight records, hotel logs, bank transfers. Slowly the lines connected. She wasn't cheating on me. She wasn't even living a double life in the usual sense. She was constructed. Each version operated inside strict boundaries. Controlled movements. Separate identities maintained with surgical precision. The investigator's marriage certificate wasn't a mistake or a cruel joke. It was a parallel structure. 2 legal husbands. 2 separate households. 2 men who had never crossed paths until now. Both of us had been placed at exact distances from her center. The cash withdrawals weren't for gifts or secret pleasures. They funded separation layers, new documents, fresh identities, maintenance costs for keeping each version clean and isolated. Every transfer followed the same rhythm, small enough to avoid flags, regular enough to sustain the machine. At 7:40 he opened the final folder. Birth records conflicted across 3 different states. One listed her birthplace as Ohio in 1993. Another showed Arizona in 1992. Employment history shifted depending on which database you queried. References to family members changed names and locations. Even her social security traces fractured when pulled hard enough. There was no single point of origin. The investigator closed the laptop at 8:05. He stood still for a long moment, staring at the scattered papers. Then he spoke quietly. He believed she had been running this pattern for years. Not 2 men. Multiple. Each one kept in his own sealed compartment, each one funding the next layer without realizing it. I drove home at 9:15. She had already left for work. The house felt heavier than usual. Her coat hung in the closet exactly where it always did. Her side of the bed was made with the same crisp corners. Everything in its place. I stood in the kitchen at 10:30 and looked at the calendar on the wall. 7 years of shared dates. 7 years of routines. 7 years of quiet evenings where she sat across from me saying almost nothing. Now every memory carried a fracture line. This was no longer about betrayal between two people. The scale had shifted. She wasn't hiding one affair or even two marriages. She was operating a system. And the only thing I still didn't know was how many other compartments existed, and whether the version of her that came home to me every night was the original at all. We waited in room 412 of the hotel at 1940. The investigator stood near the window. I sat on the edge of the bed. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning and the occasional car passing outside. She walked in at 25 using a key card under the name Claire Monroe. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, she stopped. Her eyes moved from me to the investigator and back again. No panic, no gasp. Just a slow, measured pause, as if she were recalculating distances in real time. I stood up. She didn't move. She simply looked between the two of us with the same calm focus she used when checking her phone at home. Then she spoke. Her voice stayed even. She told us we were never supposed to meet. The investigator stepped forward and listed the charges. Fraud, bigamy, multiple counts, multiple jurisdictions. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Instead, the corners of her mouth lifted slightly, not in amusement, but in something closer to exhaustion. She answered with a single word at first, no. Then she added the rest. We had all agreed to this. We simply didn't remember agreeing. The air in the room grew thicker after that sentence. I felt the floor tilt under my feet even though nothing physically moved. The investigator remained perfectly still, but his shoulders shifted by a fraction. She stood there in her dark coat, handbag still on her shoulder, watching us absorb what she had just placed between us. No denial, no tears, no rush to explain. Just that quiet, tired certainty. Nothing in her posture suggested she was trapped. If anything, she looked like someone who had run this exact scenario before and already knew the next 3 moves. I stared at her face, searching for any crack in the version I had lived with for 7 years. The woman who once folded laundry beside me at 22:30 now stood 10 feet away rewriting the ground beneath both our lives with a few calm sentences. She had known this overlap would happen eventually, and she had prepared for it. The worst part wasn't the accusation she had just made. It was the small, precise way she delivered it, as if reminding us of a contract we had signed in a dream we could no longer access. Because if we had truly agreed, then the question that remained was far more dangerous than how many husbands she had. It was what else we had forgotten we had agreed to. Within 3 days she was gone. I returned home at 18:30 to an empty house. Her closet was cleared of everything except 3 hangers that still carried the faint trace of her perfume. The joint accounts sat at 0 balance by morning. Every identity we had traced froze overnight. Passports, driver's licenses, credit lines, all locked or deleted from the systems we could access. No police report, no arrest warrant, no official trace. The investigator and I spent the following week trying to rebuild the timeline in a rented office on the edge of town. We arrived each day at 7:55 and spread documents across 2 tables until 23:40. Every new record contradicted the previous one. A hotel stay in Chicago appeared on the same night she had supposedly been in our city attending a work dinner. Flight manifests showed her in 2 different airports at 14:20 on the same Tuesday. Bank logs shifted when reloaded. The system itself seemed to resist coherence. Photographs we had collected now carried metadata that didn't match the dates on the files. Signatures changed slope between documents printed only weeks apart. Even our own marriage certificate, the one I kept in the safe, began to show slight discrepancies when compared against the digital copy held by the county office. At 2:15 one night, I sat alone at the table surrounded by paper. The investigator had gone home hours earlier. I picked up the same hotel receipt from months ago and turned it over in my hands. The ink looked fresher than it should have. The timestamp no longer aligned with the memory I'd carried of that evening. By the end of the week, the documents no longer agreed with each other, let alone with reality. Our marriage still existed on paper. The legal record remained untouched, yet it behaved like something hollow. No shared assets left to divide. No forwarding address. No final message. Just a clean excision that left the frame standing while everything inside it had been removed with surgical care. I drove past the house at 1:10 on the 8th night. The lights were off. The lawn still neatly cut. Her car was gone from the driveway, replaced by perfect tire marks in the gravel that ended abruptly. She had not simply left. She had extracted herself. And what remained were fragments that no longer pointed in any single direction. Every answer we tried to lock down fractured again by the next morning. The question that kept me awake long after the investigator stopped answering his phone wasn't where she had gone. It was whether the version of events we were left holding had ever truly happened at all. I used to think betrayal was simple. Someone lies. Someone cheats. Someone leaves. But this wasn't that. This was architecture. A life built like a system of mirrors, each reflection real enough to believe, but never complete enough to understand. The PI once said something I keep thinking about. Some people don't cheat in relationships. They design parallel realities. And the scariest part? We never found out which version of her was real, or if real was even part of the design. Because in the end, we weren't investigating a woman. We were investigating a structure built to make certainty impossible.